Hello there. In this video, I'd like to talk about HSC trials and particularly what's going on with COVID and how it's going to affect current Year 12 students and their trial HSC results. So because of the way that the lockdown is working now, and not all students are equally affected by the restrictions on schooling, it can seem a little bit unfair from one school and one student to another. So for example, here we have Mary, who lives outside of Greater Sydney, and she's already sitting her trials as normal. But we also have John, who lives in Sydney, and he doesn't even know yet about whether or how he'll sit his trial exams. And so is John being disadvantaged? And if he is, what can he do to minimise that? So the short and quick answer is no, there is no disadvantage for students who are right now in lockdown and having to complete their HSC trials either in lockdown or in some kind of restricted way, or else having them cancelled altogether and performing other assessment tasks instead. And I'll try to explain why. So the first thing to note is that Mary's school being able to go on as normal has absolutely no effect, either positive or negative, on John and what his school does. Because the trials are part of your in-school assessments, the same as all your other in-school assessments, and they are only affected in any way by the students in your own school. No other student in any other school has any effect on what happens with the moderation of in-school assessments inside of your school. And the trials are an in-school assessment that count towards your own in-school assessment mark. The second thing that I'd like to quickly point out is that with your in-school assessments, it's not the marks you receive that matter, it's your ranking. And so if you perform lower than you would have because of all this stuff that's going on with COVID and your restricted access to school, but everybody else in your school also performs lower because of the same thing, then there's been absolutely no loss to you. Because if you are able to maintain your ranking in your subjects, then that's all that matters when it comes to your in-school assessment marks. So thirdly then, it's good to have just a quick look at what your trials are actually worth. So your trial exams are worth a maximum of 30% of your school assessment mark. And your school assessment mark is worth 50% of your HSC mark in your subject. So that means that your trials, being worth 30% of half of your HSC, are worth a maximum of 15% of your final HSC mark. Now, 15% is significant, but it is not the world. There is still 85% coming from other tasks and your HSC exams that are taken into account. 15% is worth working hard for, 15% is worth putting in the effort for, but 15% is not everything. So then, just as an aside, when do my actual marks, as in the numbers that I receive, matter? And the answer is in your HSC exam. So because of the way that scores are moderated, and I have other videos that go actually into detail about that, the person who is first in the course in the school assessment marks, they want the top exam mark, the top HSC exam mark from the school to be as high as possible. And everybody else in the school wants there to be the highest average exam mark as possible. Now, all of that has nothing to do with your trials. So that is, you need those really the best results possible from your school in the HSC exam. So right now, as you're preparing for and undertaking modified trial exams, none of that is going to affect any of the moderation of your results. So then the question is there any disadvantage at all with everything that's going on with COVID and the changes to way that schooling is happening? And the answer is only if you're being disadvantaged within your own school right now. And unfortunately, there will be some students for whom this is the case. Maybe because of access to technology, maybe because of the way that things are at home, maybe because of, all kinds of factors can come into play here. But it is important to note that nothing that happens in any other school can have any impact on what's happening with your school assessment results, and that includes your trials. So where there may be advantage for some and disadvantage for others, that's only on a within the school basis. None of this is on a systemic statewide level yet. That will be something that has to be addressed for the actual HSC exams, but for trials, it's not going to have any impact. Okay, so why am I making all these points? This is a stressful time. The HSC is stressful all on its own. It is long, it is protracted, and it is difficult. COVID is stressful all on its own. It has been going on for a long time, it's been protracted, and it is difficult. This year's Year 12 students are going through both at the same time. But don't add to that stress unnecessarily by worrying about things like trials, and especially by comparing what's happening from one school to another, because they just don't have an impact on one another. You are doing your HSC within a system that expects every school to behave differently with school assessments, and it already has systems in place to deal with that later on when you do your HSC exams. So right now, you don't need to worry about that. And so with any of this, for any student going through COVID or not, I would say be diligent, be determined, be hardworking, and be consistent. And the rest will take care of itself.